Hi, good morning. Bill Harvell here, South End Evangelical Church. And on Sunday we started a new series in Genesis, starting in 37. We're looking at Joshua. No, we're not looking at Joseph, the life of Joseph. There's too many J's in the Bible. Joshua, Jacob, Jesus, Jehoshaphat, Jehu. Anyway, we're going to look in Genesis chapter 37, as I said. Let me just point out a few things about Joseph's really amazing story. Joseph's story is the longest in the book of Genesis. There are 8 main characters who illustrate how faith functions in our relationship with God, and the most important account, of course, is that of Abraham. But Joseph's story equals Abraham's in the number of chapters, 14 each, and is actually 25% longer than the record of the great farmer of the faithful. It's obvious that God does not want us to miss this message. Secondly, the life of Joseph is the clearest and greatest picture of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. And across the centuries, theologians have noted the parallels between Joseph and Jesus. One even found 110 parallels between the two. I'm not going to give you all 110, but here's just a few. Both were innocent, both were chosen and beloved by their father, both sent by their fathers to see about their brothers, both sold as slaves, and like Jesus, Joseph was put between 2 criminals, pronouncing the salvation of one and the death of the other. Joseph forgave those who sought to ruin him just as Jesus did. And in the lives of both Joseph and Christ, it was the wicked plot of those who should have been most likely to accept them that ultimately led to the salvation of all who would come. There's something remarkable about this ancient man who was faithful in small things and saw God make him ruler over many things. And we'll learn much about our Lord as we journey through with Joseph. See, Joseph experienced a powerful truth that we find in Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 8 and verse 28. It's a picture of the providence of God, working in all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. What you will see as we walk through the life of Joseph, as we look at the details, is how God used small things that on the surface look quite insignificant. And he uses them to order circumstances in such a way that Joseph is raised to a position through which millions of people will be saved from starvation. What looks like simple aspects of the story are taken by God and used to turn the tables over and over. Joseph's colourful coat, which we all learned about in Sunday school, played a role in what happened. So did the passing enslavers. There was a happenstance of being bought by Potiphar, captain of the king's guard in Egypt, and the wild coincidence of sharing a cell with the cupbearer and the baker for Pharaoh, one of whom becomes a means by which Joseph is given an audience before that king. When things are happening, we seldom realise that a series of effects is being created, and the full ramifications we often can't see. But God is at work, and often God is at work when we are least aware of it. Joseph shows us faithfulness to God no matter what. Let me show you what I mean in a few insights into the opening verse of Genesis 37. We're just going to cover the first 4 verses, and they read like this in the New King James. Now Jacob dwelt in a land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the story of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah of the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And also he made him a tunic of many colours. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Notice how the Bible cuts to the chase immediately by depicting the tension in this home. But as it is usually in dysfunctional families, this little picture here is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, if we were to take Joseph's family and made it into a soap opera, the family is so unbelievable that no one would be able to watch it and say that it's true. So he has 3 stepmothers. Actually, the New King James is wrong when it says Jacob had 4 wives. He didn't. He had 2 wives and 2 concubines. So Bilhah and Zilpah are his concubines, and Leah and Rachel are his wives. So Joseph has 3 stepmothers, 10 stepbrothers, 1 brother, and a stepsister, and they all live at home at the same time. His father Jacob, though generally a godly man, he's embraced the polygamy that was common in that day, which opened the door to jealousy, insecurity, infighting and backbiting, and almost constant conflict amongst his wives. Jacob, as we will see, was also a passive parent, and his lack of involvement and leadership brought incredible pain and confusion. Joseph's brothers took turns in being brutal, conniving, and openly immoral. And it sounds like something that Jeremy Kyle would want on his show, or if you're American, Phil Donahue, or the other guy, Jerry Springer. Growing up in Jacob's family could not have been any kind of picnic. And yet, in amongst the infighting and the blatant sin, the bad examples, and the emotional manipulation, there were some spiritual markers that struck the seeking heart of young Joseph and profoundly shaped his life in the future. And the first one we can find in Genesis 32. God makes himself known to the humble. Genesis 32 records the time when Jacob is about to go and meet his brother Esau for the first time in many years. Actually, for the first time since he cheated Esau out of his blessing. And Jacob divides his family and his flocks, and he sends them on ahead. And it must have been a scary time for Joseph. He would only be a young boy at that time. Jacob was staying behind alone at the Jabbok River to pray and to get ready to face his sins of the past. It's reported to him that Esau, who's been angry with him for years, is bearing down on him with 400 soldiers. The next morning, Joseph saw his father limping into camp to lead his family out to meet his brother. Father, what's wrong? Why are you limping? And then Joseph heard of how his father wrestled with the angel of the Lord all night, and how when he finally submitted to God, he was blessed and got a new name from the Lord himself. Joseph's father had been touched by the Lord and was changed for the remainder of his life. His limp would forever remind him of that night that he wrestled with God. Joseph understood the lesson fleshed out in his own father's experiences, that God is real. He blesses those who realize their own brokenness and guilt and long for God more than anything else. Another spiritual pointer that Joseph picked up is that God is at work around you all the time. Because Genesis 35 tells a story when Joseph was around about 13 years old when his father took the whole family to Bethel, where he pointed to the spot where he had his very first personal encounter with the Lord. Years before, running for his life from Esau, Jacob laid down and slept on the ground, where he dreamed about a great ladder coming down from heaven, and there were angels ascending and descending. And God was letting Jacob know that there was more going on than he could see. Joseph heard his father speak of the covenant relationship that began there and then between God and himself. And then his father called all his sons to enter that covenant themselves. Maybe this was the turning point for Joseph as he stood on that hallowed ground and saw the passion in his father's eyes. Is that what began the journey that would make him into such a powerful and yet humble man of God? Shortly after the Bethel experience, there were 3 deaths that shook the family. First, Deborah died as she was buried under an oak tree at Bethel. Deborah had been nurse to Joseph's grandmother Rebekah, who had died years before. With her passing, the whole story of Isaac and Rebekah's godly life was retold again. Then Joseph's own mother Rachel died, giving birth to Benjamin, and this loss brought home the fragility of life and the importance really of making the most of it. And the third blow came shortly after, when Isaac, Joseph's grandfather, died and was buried where Abraham, Sarah and Rebekah were buried. Again, the unique role Isaac played in God's purpose as was brought up. Though Joseph's current family was a dysfunctional mess, the legacy of those who had gone before him was unmistakable. He stood in the long shadow of the godly, and whatever purpose God might have prepared for Joseph as he chose to follow in the footsteps of these faithful servants, we know that Joseph was ready to see that purpose worked out. So Joseph picked up these spiritual markers when he was no more than a boy, but they helped him to break the cycle of dysfunction and to become one of the great heroes of our faith. Well, let's ask this then. How can we overcome a difficult beginning without becoming victims who replay the same thing in our families? And how can I, as a parent and a grandparent, stop replaying the same words and actions I saw in my home growing up? Now, here's a few suggestions from Joseph's example. First of all, acknowledge the sovereignty of God. Joseph believed that God is always in control of everything, and he understood that every circumstance in his life happened either by the initiation or the permission of a loving God. Decades later, at the end of his story, Joseph acknowledged his conviction to his brothers when he said, "You meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genensis chapter 50 and verse 20. He believed that God was for him and not against him, and that conviction kept him going when nothing else made sense. Secondly, he chose responsibility. Viktor Frankl was humiliated, tortured and dehumanized in Nazi prison camps in World War II, and he made this discovery. He said, "The last of all great human freedoms is to choose one's response to any given set of circumstances. The easier, more popular route is to use your circumstances as an excuse for personal sin, dysfunctional patterns and foolish behaviour." You know, awful things have been done to some of us, and the consequences have been hard. My parents are divorced, my father was an alcoholic, I was abused as a child. I'm not belittling anything that anyone has gone through. I'm simply saying that the phrase, "you don't know what I've been through," has become the launching pad for all kinds of ugly behaviour. Joseph did not let himself become a victim. He chose to break the cycle and took responsibility for his new way of life. Then we need to take the long role. This is especially important for parents. The course of action you choose today may affect your children, your grandchildren, even your great-grandchildren. Jacob's mistake had tragic long-term effects on his family that played themselves out in Joseph's life. God is always up to more than you can see, but he always leaves us clues to help us along the way. We need to remember that God uses trials to purify and strengthen our character. Just as a metal used for precision, Just as the metal used for precision parts on an aircraft undergoes tremendous pressure and heat to purify and to strengthen it, so you as a Christian, and me and every other believer, will be subjected to the purifying pressure and the strengthening heat of trials. 1 Peter 4 verse 12 says, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. So 5 things we can take away from the early story of Joseph. Acknowledge God as sovereign. Choose to take responsibility. Take a long look, not just into your own future, but into your children's as well. Look for spiritual markers. If you're in tune with God, you will know them when you see them. Remember, God uses trials to forge our character and strengthen it. Amen. I hope this message finds you all well. I hope there's something in there that is going to touch your hearts and touch your lives. Please stay safe and be blessed. Thank you.